The day my father unplugged the machine that was keeping me alive, he didn't look at my face. He looked at the bill. I still remember the sound, not the monitor flatlining, not the nurse gasping. Just the quiet, dry click of his pen as he signed the cancellation form. 3 days later, he would stand in the ruins of everything he had built, screaming my name like it was the only thing left in the world that mattered. But by then it was too late. If you've ever been treated like you were worth less than money, less than convenience, less than someone else's comfort, then you'll understand exactly how this story feels. Before we go further, let me introduce myself. My name is Ella Murphy. If stories about justice, betrayal, and the moment power shifts back into the hands of the underestimated speak to you, make sure you're subscribed. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let me tell you how my own father tried to erase me to save money. I was 27 when the accident happened. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, the kind of rain that blurs headlights into streaks of gold and red. I remember the smell of wet asphalt and the hum of my windshield wipers. Then I remember nothing. When I woke up, I couldn't move my legs, could barely lift my hands, tubes were everywhere, the room smelled like antiseptic and stale air conditioning. The doctor told me my spine had been severely injured, multiple surgeries, months of rehabilitation. A specialized medical support system was keeping my body stable while my nerves healed. Recovery is possible, he said gently, but it will take time and resources. I didn't know then that the word resources would become the knife that cut my life in half. My mother had died years earlier, that left only one person responsible for my care. My father. Richard Murphy was a businessman who worshipped one thing: profit. He had built a logistics company from nothing and treated it like his only child. Growing up, I learned early where I stood on his priority list. Below the company, below his reputation, below the next deal. But even I never imagined how far he would go. At first, he played the role perfectly. He visited the hospital in expensive suits. He shook doctors' hands. He told nurses, money is not an issue, do whatever is necessary. But I noticed something. He never stayed long. He never asked how I felt. He only asked about costs. How much is this machine per day? How long until she's functional again? What's the ROI on this treatment? I remember staring at him from the hospital bed, feeling something cold spreading inside my chest. I wasn't his daughter. I was an investment. Weeks passed, my body was trapped in slow recovery. Each small movement felt like dragging my bones through fire. At night, I cried quietly because I couldn't even turn to wipe my tears. And every evening, my father sat in a chair near the window, scrolling through spreadsheets. One day, I overheard him speaking outside the room. She's stable, he told someone on the phone, but the medical support system is bleeding money, hundreds of thousands already. A pause is. No, she's not producing anything, she's just there. Just there. I can't describe what it feels like to hear your own father say you are just there. Like a piece of furniture. Like a broken appliance. Something cracked inside me that day. But I still believed, deep down, he wouldn't abandon me. I was wrong. It happened on a Thursday morning. The hospital room felt colder than usual. The nurse avoided eye contact. Then my father walked in holding a folder. He didn't sit. He didn't greet me. He just said flatly, "The expenses are no longer justifiable." I thought I misunderstood. What? My voice was weak, barely air. He sighed like I was inconveniencing him. The medical support system costs too much. The chances of full recovery are uncertain. Continuing this is financially irresponsible. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. "You're my father," I whispered. He didn't flinch. "I have responsibilities beyond you," he replied. That sentence hit harder than the accident ever did. I felt my heart pounding against the machines keeping me alive. "So, you're letting me die?" He avoided my eyes. "I'm choosing not to waste resources on a low-probability outcome." Low probability outcome. That's what I was to him. A bad investment. He signed the cancellation papers right there in front of me. The sound of the pen scratching paper felt like nails on my skin. The nurse began crying quietly. I couldn't. I just felt numb. He walked toward the door, paused for a second, and said something that burned into my memory forever. This is just business. Then he left. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. Because I realized something terrifying. If I survived, I would never forgive him. And I would make sure he regretted every single second of what he had done. But here, what my father didn't know when he unplugged that system. 3 days later, his entire empire would begin collapsing. And the first crack would come from the one thing he had always underestimated most. Me. The first night after he signed the papers, the room felt different. Quieter. Like the air itself had given up. The specialized medical support unit beside my bed had been powering most of my body's stability. Without it, everything felt heavier. My breathing became shallow. My muscles trembled from the strain of doing even the smallest work on their own. I could hear nurses whispering outside. She's not going to last long. Her father really pulled funding. God, what kind of man does that? Their voices faded into the hum of fluorescent lights. I stared at the ceiling, feeling a cold numbness crawl through my chest. Not fear. Not yet. Just disbelief. Your mind does something strange when someone you love betrays you that deeply. It keeps trying to rewrite reality. Maybe he didn't understand. Maybe someone pressured him. Maybe he'd come back and say it was a mistake. But he didn't come back. Instead, that night, a nurse named Carla sat beside my bed long after her shift ended. She held my hand carefully like it might break. You're stronger than you think, she whispered. I wanted to believe her. But my body felt like a prison. And my heart felt like a graveyard. Sleep didn't come, only memories. I remembered being 8 years old, standing outside my father's office with a drawing in my hands. It was a crayon picture of the two of us holding hands under a bright yellow sun. He didn't even look at it. He just said, "Not now, I'm busy." I remembered winning a school award at 16 and looking into the crowd, hopping to see him. He never showed. I remembered the last conversation we had before the accident. He told me, emotions make people weak. The world respects only strength and results. Lying in that hospital bed, barely able to move, I finally understood what he meant. He believed love itself was a weakness. And he thought he had cut his biggest liability loose. But here's what he never considered. He never bothered to truly know me. Because if he had, he would have known something very important. I was not powerless. Even lying there, barely able to move, I still had one thing he couldn't measure. Information. You see, before my accident, I had been working quietly inside his company. Not as a public executive. Not as a figurehead. But as the person who handled something far more sensitive. Compliance. I knew where the legal lines were. And I knew exactly where my father had crossed them. For years I'd watched him operate in grey areas, small shortcuts at first, then larger ones. Unreported shipments. Hidden offshore accounts. Undocumented labor deals. He always justified it. Everyone does it. It's just smart business. But I had kept records. Every single one. Not because I planned revenge back then. Because I believed one day he might cross a line that couldn't be undone. And I wanted leverage to stop him. Leverage. That word echoed in my mind as I lay there, struggling to breathe. The same word he used when negotiating contracts. He had treated me like a liability. He had calculated my worth in dollars. Now I would calculate his. The next morning I asked the nurse for my phone. She hesitated. You should rest, she said gently. "I need to send a message," I whispered. She looked into my eyes, and something in them must have told her this wasn't a simple request, because she handed it to me. My fingers barely worked. Each movement felt like dragging weights through mud, but I forced them to cooperate. I opened an encrypted cloud folder. Years of documentation sat there. Evidence of every hidden deal, every illegal transaction, every falsified report. My father's empire wasn't built on pure success. It was built on carefully hidden cracks. And I had the map. For a moment, my hand trembled above the screen. Not from weakness, from emotion. Because even then, part of me hoped he would walk through the door. Apologize. Say he had made a terrible mistake. Give me a reason not to do what I was about to do. But he didn't come. Instead, a notification popped up on my phone. A news alert. Murphy Logistics announces major expansion deal. I opened the article. There was a photo of my father smiling confidently at a press conference. The caption read, CEO Richard Murphy says recent financial streamlining allowed the company to pursue its largest acquisition yet. Financial streamlining. My stomach twisted. He had cancelled my life support to free money for a business deal. In that moment, something inside me shifted permanently. The last piece of hope died, and what replaced it was something colder, clearer, a calm determination. If he believed everything in life was just business, then I would give him the most devastating business lesson of his life. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Each action cost me strength, my vision blurred often, my hands shook. But the pain only sharpened my focus. I sent carefully timed emails to regulators, to financial oversight boards, to investigative journalists. Each message contained verified documentation, not emotional accusations, cold, undeniable facts, illegal tax evasion, fraudulent reporting, bribery trails. And I didn't send everything at once. I staggered it, so the impact would hit like waves. By the end of the 3rd day, I could barely stay conscious. My body was exhausted. My lungs burned with every breath. I remember staring at the hospital window, watching rain slide down the glass, thinking one simple thought: even if I die, he will never recover from what's coming. Then my phone buzzed. A news notification. I opened it slowly. Breaking: authorities launch investigation into Murphy Logistics. Another buzz. Stock prices plummet amid fraud allegations. Another. Major clients suspend contracts pending review. I felt something I hadn't felt since the accident. Not joy. Not relief. Something deeper. Justice. Tears slid down my temples into my hair. For the first time since he walked out of that room, I smiled. But what I didn't know yet was that the real collapse hadn't even begun. Because when my father finally realized who had destroyed him, he would come running back. Not as a businessman, not as a powerful CEO, but as a desperate, broken man. And when he stood beside my hospital bed again, begging, that would be the moment I would decide whether to finish what he started, or let him live with something far worse than losing everything. By the time the 4th day came, the hospital felt like a different world. Nurses walked faster, phones rang more often, even the air seemed tighter, charged with something heavy. But inside my room, everything was still, except for the television. Every hour, new headlines flashed across the screen. Murphy Logistics under federal investigation. Investors file emergency lawsuits. CEO Richard Murphy refuses comment. I watched quietly, barely able to move, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on my body like wet concrete. The doctors said my condition was unstable without full medical support. My heart rhythm fluctuated, my breathing was shallow, recovery chances were shrinking by the hour. But strangely, I wasn't afraid anymore. I had crossed a point where survival itself wasn't the only thing that mattered. Dignity mattered. Justice mattered. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. That afternoon, Nurse Carla rushed into my room with wide eyes. "You need to see this," she said, grabbing the remote. She switched to a live news broadcast. There he was. My father. But he didn't look like the man I had always known. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale, his confident posture gone. He stood outside his company headquarters, surrounded by reporters shouting questions. "Did you commit financial fraud? Are the offshore accounts yours? Is it true your daughter was recently removed from life support due to cost-cutting?" That last question hit him like a bullet. His eyes snapped toward the reporter. For a second he looked completely lost. Then the camera zoomed closer, and I saw something I had never seen in his face before. Fear. Real, raw fear. He tried to speak, but words stumbled out uneven. This is all misinformation," he said, voice strained. "My daughter's situation is private. It has nothing to do with the company." But the damage was done. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media exploded. People weren't just angry about corporate fraud. They were furious about what he had done to me. News anchors called it heartless. Commentators called it monstrous. Even some of his own employees began speaking out. The man who built his empire on power and control was now being torn apart in front of the entire world. And he had no idea yet that I was the one pulling every string. That night, as rain pounded against the hospital windows, I felt my body weakening more than ever. My fingers barely moved. My chest tightened with every breath. Carla sat beside me again, holding my hand. "You should focus on surviving," she whispered gently. I looked at her and said something I had never admitted aloud before. "I don't think he ever loved me." The words felt like glass in my throat. Carla's grip tightened. "Some people," she said softly, "don't know how to love. That's their tragedy, not yours." Her words stayed with me, because for the first time I realized something important. This wasn't just revenge. It was truth finally catching up to someone who had spent his life outrunning it. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a news alert. It was a message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "Please answer me." My heart clenched. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't respond. Minutes later, another message. "I need to see you." Then another. "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time. That word. Sorry. It felt hollow, late, almost meaningless. But it still stirred something deep inside me. Because no matter how much pain he caused, he was still my father. And part of me still remembered being a little girl waiting for him to look at her drawing. Another message came. "Everything is collapsing. They're freezing the accounts. Investors are suing. I didn't know it would go this far." I let out a slow breath. He still didn't understand. This wasn't something that went too far. This was simply consequences finally arriving. After years of being ignored. Ignored laws. Ignored ethics. Ignored people. Ignored his own daughter. I typed slowly, each letter costing effort. "Now you know how it feels." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally a reply came. "Please just let me see you." I stared at that message, and a strange calm settled over me. Because this moment, this exact moment, was something I had imagined during countless sleepless nights while planning. The moment when the most powerful man in my life would have to come to me. Not as a king, but as a broken man asking for mercy. I looked at Carla. "Tell the front desk," I whispered, "he can come tomorrow." She nodded quietly. The next morning felt unreal. Sunlight streamed through the window, bright and sharp, almost too vivid. My body felt fragile, weak. But my mind had never been clearer. Around noon, the door opened slowly. And he stepped in. For a second, we just stared at each other. He looked older, smaller somehow, like the weight of his collapsing world had physically shrunk him. His eyes were red. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Ella." I didn't respond. He walked closer, stopping beside the bed. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know how bad it would get." I looked at him steadily. "You knew exactly what you were doing," I said quietly. His shoulders shook. I thought I was being rational, practical. I thought you might not recover." He swallowed hard. "I never imagined losing everything." That sentence hung in the air. And I realized something. He still framed everything around loss of assets. Loss of control. Loss of status. Not loss of me. Not truly. So I asked him one simple question. "If I hadn't exposed you, would you have come back?" He froze. Silence stretched painfully. And in that silence, I got my answer. Tears finally spilled down his face. "I made a terrible mistake," he said. But it wasn't the words of a man who understood love. It was the words of a man who finally understood consequences. I felt a strange mixture of emotions swirl inside me. Pain, relief, and something like closure. Because at that moment I knew the truth. I had never truly been fighting to destroy him. I had been fighting to prove something. That my life had value. That I was not disposable. That I was never just an expense on a spreadsheet. I looked into his eyes one last time and said quietly, "You cancelled my support to save money." He nodded weakly. I continued, "So I cancelled yours." His face collapsed completely. Because in that moment, he finally understood. Not just what he lost, but why. And as he stood there, trembling, broken, with nothing left to protect him, I realized something else. This wasn't the end. Because the final decision was still mine. He stood there for a long time, like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew. His hands trembled at his sides. His shoulders slumped forward, no longer carrying the sharp, rigid confidence that used to fill every room he entered. For the first time in my life, my father looked small. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the armor he had worn his entire life had been ripped off, leaving him exposed to the cold. "I can fix this," he said quietly after a while, his voice fragile. "I still have connections. I can negotiate settlements. I can rebuild. I just need time." There it was. Still talking about rebuilding the company. Still clinging to the only language he understood. Business. Control. Damage management. He took a shaky step closer to my bed. "But I can't do any of that without you," he added quickly. "The investigation, they're asking about internal compliance records. They're asking about access logs. They know someone inside released everything." His eyes searched mine desperately. "You have to help me, Ella. You're the only one who can explain this." I felt a strange calm settle inside me. This was the moment. The moment when power truly shifts. Not when someone loses everything, but when they realize the person they once discarded now holds the only key to their survival. I looked at him quietly and said, "You're not asking for help because you care about me." His lips parted but no words came out. "You're asking because you need something." Silence filled the room like heavy fog. He tried to deny it. But he couldn't. Because we both knew the truth. This wasn't a father begging his daughter. This was a businessman negotiating with someone he once labeled a liability. His voice dropped into a whisper. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. That sentence struck something deep inside me. Because for the first time, he sounded human. Not powerful. Not calculating. Just lost. And broken. A long, painful memory surfaced in my mind. I was 12 years old. I had fallen during a school race and scraped both my knees badly. Blood ran down my legs. I remember sitting on the ground crying, looking around for him. He had been there that day, watching from the stands. But when he saw me fall, he didn't run to help. He just shook his head and muttered, "Winners don't cry." That moment had stayed with me my entire life. It was the day I learned something harsh. In his world, weakness had no value. Now here he was, crying, trembling, begging. The irony was almost unbearable. My chest tightened as conflicting emotions surged through me. Anger, pain, sadness, and something unexpected. Pity, not the soft kind, the heavy kind. The kind you feel when you realize someone destroyed their own life long before you ever touched it. I took a slow breath. You spent your whole life believing love was weakness, I said quietly. He didn't argue. Because he knew it was true. You taught me that everything is just business, I continued. That relationships are transactions, that people have value only if they produce results. My voice shook slightly. So when you cancelled my medical support, you were just following your own rules. His face crumpled. I was wrong, he whispered. I looked at him steadily. Yes, I said, you were. Silence stretched between us. And in that silence I realized something important. Revenge had already happened. Not in the headlines. Not in the financial collapse. But here, in this moment, where the most powerful man in my life stood powerless before me. Unable to command. Unable to control. Unable to buy his way out. He spoke again, his voice barely audible. Is there anything I can do to make this right? The question lingered in the air. And I thought about it carefully. Because this was the final step. The last decision. Destroy him completely. Or leave him with something heavier than total ruin. I finally answered. You can't undo what you did, I said softly. He nodded, tears falling freely now. But you can face it. He looked confused. So I explained. You will cooperate with the investigation fully, I said. You will admit everything. You will accept whatever consequences come. His eyes widened. Prison. Fines. Permanent loss of reputation. He understood exactly what that meant. And you will never again treat another human being like they are disposable, I continued. Not employees, not partners, not anyone. He swallowed hard. I will, he said hoarsely. I watched him closely. For the first time in my life. I believed him. Because he wasn't speaking like a CEO making promises. He was speaking like a man who had already lost everything that mattered. He hesitated, then asked in a broken whisper. And you? I knew what he meant. Would I forgive him? Would I ever see him as my father again? The truth was complicated. So I gave him an honest answer. I don't hate you anymore, I said quietly. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. But I don't trust you either. That hurt him. I could see it clearly. But it was the truth. And whether you ever earn that trust, I added, is something only time can decide. He nodded slowly. Because he understood. Some wounds don't heal with apologies. They heal with consistent change. Or they don't heal at all. After a long moment, he reached out hesitantly, like he was asking permission. I allowed him to take my hand. His grip was weak. Warm. Human. Not the cold, calculating touch I had known my whole life. Just a father holding his daughter's hand. Maybe for the first time in a real way. Weeks later, the investigation concluded. He confessed fully. Murphy Logistics was dismantled. Assets were liquidated. He faced legal consequences. But something else happened too. My story spread widely. Not as a revenge tale, but as a reminder of what happens when people value profit over humanity. And slowly, very slowly, my health began to stabilize. Doctors adjusted treatments. Charity foundations stepped in after hearing my story. And against the odds, I survived. Not just physically, but emotionally. Because I finally understood something powerful. I was never just an expense. Never just a liability. Never just a line on a balance sheet. I was a human being. With worth that no number could measure. And the man who once failed to see that would now spend the rest of his life remembering the cost of that mistake. If this story moved you, or reminded you that your value is never defined by someone else's calculations, make sure you subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Because sometimes the greatest justice isn't destroying someone completely. Sometimes it's making them live long enough to truly understand what they lost.